Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to be talking about a little bit more of an educational type of video. We're going to be discussing the main savings products that you can get at your financial institution. These are products that will help you save, grow your money, either with interest or actual growth, to help set you up for whichever goal you're looking to hit, whether that's retirement or some other financial goal that you may have. So to start, these are the main types of saving products that you can get at your financial institution. You've got your typical high interest savings account. You've got the RESP, which is the education savings plan, usually for your children. Your RRSP, which is the retirement savings plan for your retirement, and the tax-free savings account, or the TFSA. There's also the non-registered, which usually comes into play once the others are all maxed out, but depending on your situation, you might actually use this before you max out something like an RRSP or an RESP. So to start off with, we're going to talk about the very basic one. It's the high interest savings account. This is one that pretty much anybody should have. You can get started super early. You know, you can be 5 years old and have a high interest savings account. Maybe your parents can open one up for you. And this is an account that's very flexible, right? So you can use it for whatever purpose you want. It can store cash, which is fully liquid, meaning that there's no restrictions on it, right? You can put some money in and take it out tomorrow, or take it out the same day, or leave it in there for a rainy day. You know, a lot of people use it as an emergency fund. So after they start earning money, they build up an emergency fund, which is usually a recommended 3 to 6 months of your monthly expenditures. And because it's sitting in a high interest savings account, it's fully liquid, so you can take it out at any time. It pays you some interest, not a lot, but you know, relative to other types of savings accounts that we're going to talk about, the potential is very low when it comes to earnings. But for a savings account, it's at least paying you something. And usually it is for short-term investments, like I said. So either an emergency fund or perhaps a rainy day fund. Or if you're building towards a certain type of goal, like you want to buy a, motorcycle, for example, you might use this type of account to build up to a couple $1,000s so you can buy that motorcycle. The most recommended one, I think, is the one by EQ Bank. It's a checking and savings built-in one. I've talked about it before on my everyday savings account video. I'll link that in the description if you haven't seen that. But basically, this pays you interest 1.5% currently, and they have no monthly fees or anything like that. You can move money in and out whenever you want. So it's a pretty flexible account. Next, we've got the RESP. So this is the first type of registered account that we're going to be talking about. Note it says registered education savings plan. And registered just means registered with the federal government. So the government will be able to track exactly what is going on between the accounts, and the financial institution that you're with will report it to the government, whatever you're doing in here, as far as contributions, withdrawals, and that kind of stuff. So the main purpose of this account is, as the name states, an education savings plan for your children. So in order to help facilitate that and to incentivize people to open it, there's actually a couple options that the government give you, and these are in the form of grants. So basically, this is free money that the federal government will provide to you for putting money into this account. Now, the first one's called the CESP, or the Canada Education Savings Plan. This is a 20% match up to a maximum of $500 per year and a lifetime maximum of $7,200. So what that means is if you put in $2,500 as your contribution, you will be able to get the maximum $500 per year, meaning you put in $2,500 into this plan and the government will give you $500 for that year, up to a maximum of $7,200 lifetime. So that's equivalent to roughly around 15 years. So even though your child can't go to post-secondary education until they're usually 18 plus, it means that you have a couple years in there that you can either not contribute at all, or if you're not contributing to the maximum every year, then you can split that between 18 years to get the $7,200. Now, for some people, depending on their situation, they might not have that much cash to put in a year. $2,500 to put towards your kid's education on top of, monthly expenses and all the other things people have going on, that might be tough. So what the government has allowed to do is they've allowed a catch-up mechanism of 1 year, meaning that for a year that you did not contribute, for example, if let's say you don't start contributing until your child is 5 years old. So that means that you've missed years 1, 2, 3, and 4, right? If you were to start now at 5 years old, even if you did the maximum of $2,500 every year, you wouldn't be able to hit the maximum $7,200 allotment because of how late you started. So what they allow you to do with the catch-up mechanism of 1 year is you can put double the $2,500 contribution, so you can do $5,000. If you do $5,000, the government will give you 20% of that, which is a $1,000 grant for that year, and essentially it allows you to catch up that year that you missed. Now, it is important to note that you can only do a maximum of a catch-up of 1 year. So if your child was already 17 by the time you discovered this, and you thought, oh, I'll just dump in, $50,000, right? Then I'll be able to get the maximum $7,200 right away. Well, they don't let you do that. So the maximum you'd only get for that year, even if you put in $50,000, is still only that $1,000 per year. So it's good to start early. It's obviously the best case scenario if you can start as soon as they're born, but essentially the latest you could start is probably around 9 or 10. And if you did the maximum to do the catch-up mechanism of 1 year, you would still be okay to get the full $7,200. Now, the other awesome thing is all the growth in this account is tax-free. So if you're investing in higher growth products starting from when they're young, because you've got that full 18-year time horizon, you can grow this account to a very significant value with all the grants that you get from the government and all the growings over the long time horizon. It can actually turn into a pretty substantial fund. Now, when you withdraw money, the grants are taxable for the beneficiary, meaning your child, that $7,200 in quote-unquote income will be taxed on their income, but usually because they're young, even if they get taxed $5,000 a year, there likely won't be any tax implications because they're below the minimum threshold. Now, it is important to note that you're only allowed to withdraw for secondary education or post-secondary education, that is. And I put an asterisk because they're not that critical with what you actually withdraw it for. Meaning, let's say your child goes to school, their tuition is $5,000. That doesn't mean that you can only withdraw $5,000. You can withdraw perhaps $8,000 because it's $5,000 for tuition, it's another $1,000 for books, and maybe they need to get some form of transportation, and you buy a beater junk car, and that's what the extra $2,000 is for. The FIs, or the financial institutions, are not going to ask for proof of exactly what you're using it for. What they usually will ask is some sort of enrollment record to show that, okay, this is for post-secondary education, but you don't have to bring, the full tuition to justify how much money you're taking out. So they are pretty loose with that, just something to keep in mind. And there is a lifetime contribution maximum of $50,000 per beneficiary, meaning that you can only contribute up to a maximum of $50,000 for your child. The why that the government does this is some people might, go overboard. They might contribute, let's say $10,000 because the growth is tax-free, right? And there's no way for the government to actually figure out if you're spending this money on your child's education. Like I said, they don't really verify as long as there's enrollment proof. So you can enroll your child, but actually take the money out and spend it for your own purposes, right? Now, one thing I actually realized I forgot to add on here is you can have individual versus family RESPs. So individual just means that this RESP that you set up is specifically for this child. For the family RESP, you can set up one kid in there, or if you've got multiple children, 2 or 3, you can put them all under the same family RESP. little bit easier. Keep everything in one, and then when you contribute, you can just do all the contributions into that one. So what happens if the child doesn't go to school? Well, the grant money that you got gets returned to the government. The interest and growth that happened in the account is taxed at your regular tax rate, meaning your marginal tax rate. So if you're paying 40% taxes, then you're going to get taxed at 40% plus 20%. So it is actually a very hefty, consequence in a way. But they do that because essentially you would have had 18 years of tax-free growth. And so they want to catch up essentially on the tax that you should have owed. So make them go to school. For the provincial grants, there's 2 provinces currently that offer some benefit. Saskatchewan provides a 10% contribution match as well, up to $250 per year. And BC gives a one-time $1,200 contribution. There are a couple stipulations, so I would double check with your FI to make sure that your child meets all the rules, but those are the 2 kind of provincial grants that are offered. And as far as investment products that you can have in this account, there's no limit. You can have any type of investment product you want. Whoops. There you go. So now we've got the tax-free savings. So the tax-free savings account is probably my favorite account. It started in 2009, and they came out with a limit of $5,000 per year. So how that works is it takes the year that you turn 18, and the year that you turn 18, you get the contribution year. You get the contribution limit for that year. Now, we can actually take a look here. There's a calculator that I linked here. So if you just put when you turned 18, if it was before 2009, that's the total contribution room available to you in 2021. If you turned 18 in 2008, then it'll tell you here, 23,500. So that's just a simple little tool that you can use if you want to calculate your contribution room. Now, over contribution to this account, here were your limits, right? If you contribute more than this, depending on your age, they're going to tax you at 1% per month. So, I mean, if you annualize that up, that's a 12% penalty if you over contributed in January. So it's very hefty. So it's very important you keep track of how much you're contributing. If you over contribute by accident because you go to your bank and the bank says, oh yeah, you can totally contribute $40,000, and you find out that that was an error, that is on you. The financial institution is not going to take liability for anything regarding contribution limits, and the CRA is not going to care that, this financial advisor that you went to at the bank gave you wrong advice. So you really have to make sure that you track your contribution very closely. And the reason why this is my favorite account is because the growth in this is all tax-free, and there's no restriction because you can use this for long-term goals. Maybe it's buying a house or saving for retirement, or you can use it for short-term goals, right? You can do whatever you want with this account. Now, the contribution calculation is a little bit tricky, so I've listed out a couple examples that I'll go over. To keep this simple, let's say you turned 18 this year. So you get the $6,000 of contribution room this year. In scenario 1, it's very simple. In January, you went, I'm going to put all the $6,000 in. I'm going to leave it for the entire year. So at the end, you use the all of it. Your limit left is 0. In scenario 2, we're saying, let's say you do multiple deposits throughout the year. You do the first one for $3,000, the next one for another $3,000, or maybe you do 6 for $1,000. It doesn't matter. But you go up to the full $6,000, so your limit is, of course, 0. Now, in scenario 3, let's say you put in $6,000 in January, and in February you needed to pay a bill, or you had an emergency, so you took out $2,000. You cannot put this $2,000 back in the same calendar year, otherwise it will count as an overcontribution. When you put in that $6,000 in January, your limit is now 0. Okay, because the limit does not reset until the end of the calendar year. So it doesn't matter when you take the money out throughout the year, you cannot put that same amount of money back in. Now note, for this example, we said you were 18, so you only have $6,000 of contribution room. Let's say you turned 18 in 2020. So in 2021, your limit is actually $12,000, right? So in January, you do 6,000. February, you take out 2,000. Now in the same example, this limit left was 0, but right now your limit left is still 6,000, right? Because you started with 12,000 and you have $6,000 left. So theoretically, in March, if you do another 6,000, then now your limit left is 0. Now note, you did $12,000 of contribution, right? You took out $2,000, so there's actually only $10,000 in this account. But the CRA only calculates how much you put in to determine your contribution room for that year. You will get that withdrawal amount back at the beginning of the following year. So in 2022, because you took out $2,000, you will get the limit of 2022. Let's say it's again 6,000 just for argument's sake. Then now you have $8,000. You have $6,000 plus the 2,000 that you took out last year, and you'll have the $8,000. So the other thing when it comes to contribution room is it's a little weird because if you grow this money inside, you actually get that actually becomes the room that you're able to put in. So if you do, let's say $6,000, let's use this one. You do $6,000. By the end of December, it's worth $8,000, and you take out $8,000, then you actually get that limit for 2022, and you'll get $8,000 plus whatever the 2022 limit is. I will have a separate video on tax-free savings accounts because the contribution is a little bit tricky sometimes. So I'll go over that into a little bit more detail. And then we've got the RSPs, the registered retirement. Now, as the name implies, usually this is for retirement, for long-term savings. I did do a full video breakdown, which is of my RRSP 101. So I've linked it here. Would obviously recommend a watch. But the long and short of it, if I go, kind of bullet form here, basically you're allowed to contribute 18% of your earned income. So that gets deducted off your income and you get that back in taxes, right? So if you had $70,000 of earned income in 2020 and you put in $5,000, then you're only going to get taxed on $65,000. Now the carry forward is infinite, meaning the contribution room. So we said you're allowed to contribute 18%. So let's say if you made $100,000, you get $18,000 worth of contribution room. There is a maximum, so do double check because it changes every year. But let's say just 4 simple numbers. It's 18% of $100,000. You get $18,000 worth of contribution room for that year. If you deposit $10,000, that $8,000 of extra unused room does carry over into the future. Same thing with the TFSA. There's a penalization of 1% per month for overcontribution. Now, the little bit of a difference is the government gives you a $2,000 lifetime overcontribution as kind of like this is your buffer room. So you can overcontribute by $2,000 without getting penalized, but as soon as you go over that, they're going to ding you that 1%. And same thing, you can use any type of investment products. But with the RSP, it is definitely better to focus on higher growth potential investments because, and I've shown this calculator before, let's say you've got $10,000 in there right now. Every year you're putting in, let's just say $5,000. If you're investing in a product, for example, like a high interest savings account, right now that gives you 1.5%, that's going to turn into $203,000. Okay, keep that number in mind. Next, let's say you decide to buy a balanced portfolio. That might pay you about 4% a year. So that goes up to $312,000. So without you doing anything else besides picking a different investment, you've got an extra over $100,000 in retirement. Now, let's say you pick, a bit of an all equities portfolio, but maybe you focus on more of the conservative investments. Now you're up to $452,000 a year. So once again, you're getting an extra $150,000. Not by you doing anything different, but you investing in something different. Now, historically, if you invested in the broad market index, you're looking at about 8 to 10% a year. So let's go with the middle. We'll use 9%. And you can see a huge difference. So if we go back to the beginning, you can have $814,000 in your portfolio. Or if you invest in just a high interest savings account, you can have $200,000 a year, right? So with long-term time horizons like the RRSP, it's really important that you're focusing more on a growth-oriented style of investment so that you can take advantage of this compounding interest, And for me, my personal goal on my portfolios are the 8 to 10% range, just like if I was investing in a broad market index fund. Ideally, I would make more than that, but as far as a target benchmark goes, that's roughly what I'm shooting for. Lastly, you've got the non-registered account. Like I said, this is just a separate account that people open usually once their registered accounts are maxed out. So same thing. This is kind of more of a long or short-term goals, whatever your purpose is for this account. There's no perks, but there's also no restrictions in the account, right? You don't have to worry about any contribution limits. You're unfortunately not going to get any free money from the government because it's just used as an extra investment vehicle, right? The income, you're going to get taxed on all this income. So that just based on the type of investment product you have and your personal income tax rate. Different types of investment products will be taxed at a different rate. This I will go into when I talk about the investment products. So I will have a video which basically lists out, for example, how you get taxed on mutual funds, how you get taxed on dividends, how you get taxed on GICs, for example. So there's a lot of different types of investment instruments. Basically, all of these accounts that you see here, you can invest in all of those different types of options. The high interest savings account, the reason why it's low interest relative to other, this should probably say other savings vehicles, is because you don't have that flexibility, right, to invest in other types of investments. All you can do is leave it as cash and get paid a little bit of interest on keeping that money in there. So hopefully this was beneficial and helpful information to most people. Most of these accounts or all of these accounts are available at your financial institution that you go to. So I definitely recommend going in, speaking with an advisor there. Unfortunately, not all of the advisors might actually be that knowledgeable about each type of investment. So definitely try and find one that you feel is knowledgeable about what they're talking about so that they can actually provide you good financial advice. And obviously, there's also a bunch of online information that you can take a look at as well, government websites. And of course, that's what I'm trying to do here. Just giving some people some financial literacy so that they can be armed with some information. They can make some informed decisions about their own financial future. So it would mean a lot if you guys left a like, subscribed if you like the content, and definitely share it with other people. I will catch you guys next time with a typical portfolio update.